first met Lydia Vladimirovna in 1998 on my second visit to Yalta, which is a beautiful seaside town surrounded by mountains covered with pine forests, similar to the south of France or Italy. And the Black Sea is not black, but brilliantly blue. There are lots of cafes and tourists. In summer it's hot, but there's usually a cooling sea breeze in the afternoon, so it's a really beautiful place to live. My mother-in-law always loved hot weather, sun, plants, swimming in the sea, and her apartment was a short distance from the beach, so she would often walk down and have a swim in the sea on her own in the afternoons. Yalta has a wonderful plant life, and plants and flowers are always something which my mother-in-law loved very much. Whenever we were in a garden, I always walked on the side of the plants to prevent her from taking cuttings, which she had a very bad habit of doing. We could never stop her doing this. I always got on very well with Lydia. I was a little surprised at first that she took it for granted that I could speak Russian. Later on I found out that she always assumed, wherever she was, that people would understand her if she spoke Russian to them. She was unshakable in her belief that Russian was the dominant world language, and if you spoke a sentence of Russian to somebody, they would understand at least a part of that sentence. In December, just a few weeks ago, we were at a craft fair in Glasgow, which was in fact run by the Russian community in Glasgow, though Lydia Vladimirovna didn't know this. We went there, she saw something she liked, and she addressed the salesperson in Russian, as usual, and she got a reply in fluent Russian, and she didn't bat an eyelid at this reply, which most people would have done, so I was glad she wasn't disillusioned on what was one of her last shopping trips. My mother-in-law was always a very active person. When I first met her, she was building a small house in the grounds of her apartment, a domek, it's called a domek for tourists, to stay because there was quite a big influx of tourists in Yalta in the summer. And she often travelled to her dacha, which was a detached two-storey house which was under construction some distance from Yalta. In her career in the Soviet Union, she was a nachalnik, which is a boss, which is a position of great respect and authority in the Soviet Union. And she never lost the habit of giving orders. She was accustomed to giving orders and getting them obeyed unquestioningly. I remember once we were travelling back from her dacha on a trolley bus when she saw some fruit being sold at a stall on the other side of the road. She instantly commanded the driver to stop the trolley bus. She got out, bought the fruit, and although the people on the bus weren't happy and they were muttering about this unwanted delay to their schedule, they didn't say anything when she went back onto the bus because that shows her air of authority. And she never lost that either in life. My mother-in-law always liked meeting people, and she never considered herself to be old. She didn't like the company of old people. In fact, she said they were too depressing. When she was 91, we suggested that she might like to visit a day centre for the elderly during the day when we were at work, just to give her company and to keep her occupied. But she said, no, I'm not old enough for that yet. And she always maintained a very positive mental outlook. She was always independent. Even in her last years, or up to 4 or 5 years ago, she would take a bus into Paisley and do shopping on her own, even though she couldn't speak English. And she would come back again. And earlier this year, I was surprised by somebody I noticed mentioned, oh, I saw your mother-in-law in town today, and we never knew that she'd run out of the house at all. And she never said that she'd been in town, so after that we were careful to keep the front door locked, but the back door was open so she could go into the garden, and she loved gardening, so she spent long hours in the garden. She always denied being a babushka in Russian, which is grandmother, and we had a private joke that she was not a babushka, but a babushka, which is a butterfly. And when she was struggling to get out of the car, I would say to her, "Что ли, Lydia Vladimirovna, babushka и babushka?" And she always said, "No, я babushka." And babushka, конечно. So she was a butterfly, and it was appropriate because she liked bright colours, she liked flowers, the warmth, and she had a sweet tooth. So I think that was an appropriate nickname for her. Nobody else knew this was just our private joke. She was always very sure of herself. Having been in nachalnik, she didn't like to take advice from me. And when I tried to teach her English, she would always say, "Oh, that's wrong, you don't pronounce that letter like that, it's like such and such as it would be in Russian." So we gave up trying to teach her English. And even at home, we were under strict instructions never to speak English. We had to speak Russian in her presence, which we did quite happily. Lydia Vladimirovna always showed a very good taste in being fond of the male of the species. Perhaps that's why we got on so well. And she had an active romantic life, even in her last years. She was corresponding with her partner, Viktor Vasilievich, in Yalta by Skype and by letter. And not many people would be so engaged in life, shall we say, in their late 80s or early 90s. I always enjoyed telling Lydia Scottish folk tales and legends in Russian, and she was good to practice on because her short-term memory wasn't too great, and she didn't mind if I told the same things over and over again or repeated the same jokes. So we always got on very well. She was almost a member of the Scottish Tourist Guides Association. Unofficially, she attended her last CPD event in Greenock just a few weeks ago. She was with us there, and she loved us. She loved people and travelling and seeing things. She was always very anxious. She wouldn't miss any CPD event if she could possibly avoid it. We travelled a lot together throughout Scotland and England, and in her later years she travelled a lot with my wife to Turkey, Egypt and Tunisia and to Italy as well. She was always planning to go back to Yalta, and this year we couldn't do it because of the political situation, so unfortunately she didn't get her last trip to Yalta. But she was planning to go on holiday in January. My mother-in-law was very fortunate to have such a dedicated and resourceful daughter, Natasha. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, living conditions deteriorated a lot in Ukraine. People lost their pensions and their savings through inflation. Pensions became worthless, and my wife always supported her. At first, she used to stay most of her time in Yalta, and she would come over to us in winter, but over the years she spent more and more time with us in winter and less time in Yalta. I think Lydia got a lot of her strength from having brought up in the orphanage and being separated from her parents and having to survive wartime conditions at an early age. That made her very independent and gave her an inner strength, which most people I don't think have, and that's really what kept her going all these years. It was much harder for her to get into university and pursue a career because she was the daughter supposedly of an executed enemy of the people. And she had a black mark against her name, and she could have been denounced at any time during her early career. Even in later life, she was not allowed to travel abroad, and it's a testament to her strength of character that she made such a success of her life when most other people would have failed. Some years ago, she had made a complete recovery from a stroke, and we were hoping that she would do so again, but unfortunately, this was not to be the case. But she'll always live in our memories, and we can treasure our remembrances of Lydia Vladimirovna. I'm just going to read a prayer here in Russian. It's actually in church.